The prairie wore its loneliness like a veil that evening, a hush stretching across the wide horizon where the sun bled itself into the dust. The air shimmered gold and the world smelled of iron, smoke and something older, something like memory. Near the trading post stood a young woman, still as the windmill behind her. Nocomi's. Her dark braid glinted faintly in the dying light, and her eyes, steady, unflinching, watched men come and go, laughing, spitting, pretending not to see her. They saw her, of course. They just pretended she wasn't there. Inside the post, the murmur of settlers rose and fell like a tired tide. One woman's voice, sharp and careless, cut through the hum. "No man wants a native woman for a wife," she said, her words carrying like thrown stones. "Not unless he's gone soft or lost his sense." The room chuckled, and Nocomi's hands tightened around the basket she held. The leather straps dug into her palms, but she didn't move. She had learned silence the way others learned prayer, through repetition, through necessity. Outside the wind shifted. A new rider was coming up the trail, his horse's hooves stirring a gentle rhythm in the dust. He was broad-shouldered, sunburnt, and carried the kind of stillness that comes from years alone on the trail. His name was Hania Ward, though no one in town knew that yet. To them he was just another drifter, one more ghost among the living. He dismounted, the saddle creaking under his weight, and tied his reins with a patience that made even the wind pause. As he pushed open the post door, the laughter dimmed. He nodded once, polite but distant, and went about his business. From the corner, Nocomi's watched him, her breath shallow, not out of fear but of recognition. Something about his bearing reminded her of rivers that run deep but speak softly. She looked away before he could catch her gaze. Hania asked the shopkeeper for coffee, rope, and nails. His voice carried a warmth that seemed to belong to another place. When he reached for his coin purse, his eyes flicked toward her briefly, curiosity unspoken. Outside again he saw her step from the shadows, her shawl catching the sunset's last breath. For a moment neither of them moved. Then the wind broke the spell and she turned away, her footsteps quiet but deliberate. That night Hania sat by his campfire a mile out of town, his horse grazing in the dark. He couldn't stop seeing her face, proud and lonely, framed by twilight. He'd seen hardship in the eyes of men, in the cracked earth and dead cattle, but never that kind of grace born from being unseen. The thought lingered longer than he liked. He told himself it was nothing, just a moment passing through him like dust through fingers. Still he dreamed of her that night. Days passed. The town continued its routines, trading, gossiping, surviving. Nocomi's worked quietly, sewing for the settlers, her fingers swift and sure. Each morning she walked by the old church and heard children laugh at her behind whitewashed fences. Each evening she returned to her small cabin near the edge of the valley, where her mother once sang to the river before sickness took her voice away. Hania began to appear more often. Sometimes mending his saddle near her cabin, sometimes offering to help fix her fence. At first she refused him with polite silence. She'd learned that kindness from men often carried a debt. But his patience was steady as rain. He never pushed, never pitted. He simply worked beside her, wordless, the air between them rich with things unsaid. One evening, he left a small loaf of bread by her doorstep. The next morning it was gone. Nothing more was said. The town of course noticed. "That drifter's taken a shine to her," the blacksmith muttered. "He'll ruin himself mixing with her kind." Sheriff Griggs spat in the dust and nodded. Man ought to know better. Rumors grew like weeds in dry soil, fast, ugly, inevitable. Nocomi's heard the whispers. When she brought her mended clothes to the post, people looked at her differently, their smiles tighter, their coins dropped in her palm like something contagious. She said nothing, but her hands trembled once when she packed her needle away. Hania heard too. The preacher warned him in soft tones about appearances and God's order. He listened, jaw tight, then left without a word. That evening he rode out toward her cabin again, the sun lowering itself into the earth behind him. He found her by the riverbank, the same river that once took her mother's song. She was gathering reeds, her skirts wet at the hem. He dismounted quietly. She didn't turn until he spoke. "Evening," he said, his voice careful as though testing the air. She looked at him, the faintest smile flickering before she said, "You shouldn't be here." "Maybe not," he answered. "But here I am." The river murmured between them, slow and silver. He took a step closer, then another. She didn't move away, but her eyes were distant, watching the horizon instead of him. "They'll talk," she said softly. "They already do." He nodded. "Let 'em talk. I've got ears enough to know what matters and what don't." She almost laughed. A short, disbelieving sound. They say no man wants a native woman for a wife. Her voice broke on the word wife, a fragile thing laid bare. Hania's gaze didn't waver. Then maybe I'm no man by their measure. The wind caught her shawl and lifted it like a banner. The world seemed to hush for a heartbeat. She looked at him fully then, eyes searching, uncertain whether to trust what she saw. And in that silence something shifted, not like thunder but like dawn. That night rain came. Heavy, cleansing rain that beat against the roofs and washed the dust from the roads. In her cabin, Nocomi sat by the window thinking of his words. She had known loneliness as long as memory allowed. She had worn it like a second skin. But now, for the first time, she wondered what it would feel like to set it down. When morning came, she found him already waiting outside, his horse steaming in the cool air. He didn't speak. He only handed her a small carving, a wooden river bird, wings spread wide. Made it last night, he said. Seemed right. Her fingers brushed his as she took it, and that small contact carried more meaning than any vow could have. Days blurred into weeks. He helped her rebuild her porch, taught her how to saddle his horse, listened when she spoke of the old songs. In return, she taught him the names of wildflowers and the way to read weather by scent alone. They said little, yet everything between them grew. But peace never holds long where gossip rules. Sheriff Grigg came one afternoon, hat in hand but warning in his voice. You're stirring up trouble, Ward. Town don't take kindly to this. Hania wiped his hands on his trousers. Then the town'll have to learn. The sheriff's jaw tightened. You think you can just change how folks see her? No, Hania said quietly. But I can show 'em what I see. That night, Nocomi's wept quietly, anger and fear braided together. She told him to leave to save himself. They'll never forgive you for me, she whispered. He touched her face, thumb tracing the tear's path. I ain't asking for forgiveness. She shook her head. You don't understand what it costs. I do, he said. And I'm paying it gladly. Outside, thunder rolled low. Inside, silence bloomed like a held breath. The firelight flickered across their faces, two souls carved from different wounds, finding shape in each other's reflection. The next morning they walked together into town. The air was sharp, the streets muddy from last night's rain. People stopped what they were doing. Eyes followed, mouths tightened. Hania took her hand. No words. No grand gesture. Just the truth of it, two hands bound in quiet defiance. They crossed the square, passed the saloon and entered the small church. Reverend Cole hesitated behind the pulpit, sweat beading his brow. The silence stretched until it almost broke. Then, without ceremony, he began to speak the words. Short, simple, trembling. When it was done, the room remained silent. Nocomi stood beside Hania, her chin lifted, her breath steady. The sheriff looked away first. Then one by one people began to disperse, muttering, uncertain. Outside the wind softened. It carried the scent of wet sage and something like peace. That evening, the river shimmered gold again, as if remembering the first time it had seen her alone. But she wasn't alone now. Their cabin would rise on the valley's edge, their lives stitched together not by approval but by endurance. Years later, travelers passing through would hear about them, the cowboy and the native woman who defied a town's silence with the simple act of staying. Children played near the river she once wept beside. Her laughter, they said, sounded like the prairie wind at dusk. And if you listen closely, you can still hear it, the whisper of love that asked for nothing but the right to exist, the quiet courage that outlasted shame. The story doesn't end here, it just settles like twilight over the plains, soft and endless, waiting to be remembered.